Universal mathematics and universal ratios. Universal mathematics are basically simple dimensions in ratios of equal and opposite tonal actions and reactions of opposite expressions of the one force. All expression of force is either plus or minus, equilibrium, or motion in inertia. Universal mathematics are based on the plus and minus relationships of tonal pressures due to the opposition of sex, force, and motion. Opposition means plus and minus. There can be no expression of force without the evidence of that expression in pressures. All dimensions are tonal. All expression of force is tonal. All pressures are tonal. All effects of motion are tonal. All tones are definite relations. All definite relations are in accord with the simple formula of the locked potentials. All direction is either toward the electric force of higher potential, which is increasingly resisted, or toward the magnetic force of lower potential, which is increasingly assisted in the universal ratio. All directions are pressure directions. The universe of motion is a universe of varying pressures which cause that motion. All pressures are either the contraction pressures of charging mass or the expansion pressures of discharging mass. Let us add to the pressure laws a dimension law. All dimensions contract in the direction of electric force and expand in the direction of magnetic force in universal ratio. Equilibrium of motion in inertia is represented by 0. 0 in sex, force, and motion means an equilibrium of pressures. 4 means maximum pressure opposition. The immediate 2s and 3s, plus and minus, are the comings and goings between the cold 0 of expansion in the violet of inertia and the hot 4 of contraction in the yellow of opposed motion. 0 in force does not represent nothingness, nor does plus mean more than nothing, not minus, nor minus mean less than nothing. Such a concept of mathematics is not in accord with the universe of the illusion of motion. The one substance is a tangible substance. It is something. This is not an empty universe. It is not a void. Non-dimension does not mean nothingness. The universe of the one thinking substance is not one of quantity or dimension. It is a substance capable of causing an appearance of quantity through the life principle of the substance, which we term energy. The universal constant of energy is X quantity. X quantity is apparently divisible. This divisibility of quantity and its dimensions are relative and measurable. The relations of its dimensions are in fixed ratios. These ratios are simple and absolute, but their apparent variability is complex. The universal constant may be added to or multiplied by, but its accumulation never varies in its relative dimensions. The dimension X is unimportant, for it represents the illusion of a total of apparent motion which disappears in the equilibrium of inertia. Now I'm going to read you the chart page. This chart is called Universal Mathematics. I'll just read what's on the bottom here. The universe is divided into the appearance of separate parts, all of which have relative mass. All mass is accumulated into systems, which are in absolute equilibrium. All mass in all systems and all systems of systems are divided into a series of equal plus and minus dimensions, all of which appear to be independent dimensions. There are no independent dimensions in this universe of motion in equilibrium. When one dimension appears to change, all of the other 17 appear also to change, but always in the same ratios, and always in conformity with the formula of the locked potentials. Dimension chart number 1, distance, area, and volume ratios in contracting and expanding units of all expressions of motion. And that is what is under this chart. The dimensions of relative ratios are important, for by knowledge of these relations, one will be enabled to assemble divided quantities in any desired multiple to produce any desired effect. All dimensions are relative. All dimensions are either more or less than equilibrium. This is a universe of more and less. Every effort of motion which is added to must be equally subtracted from. Mathematics are bounded by the absolute limits of effects of motion measured by adding to or by subtracting from in universal ratio. Mathematics cannot transcend universal limitations. Multiplication and division are but ratios of more and less. This universe of dimension is limited in its expression to more and less. All units are either plus or minus. Therefore, all systems other than the double tone unit systems 504 plus plus and 100 minus minus are either plus or minus in their pressure totals. Every plus pressure total must be balanced by a minus one to maintain a system in equilibrium. No mathematical conclusion, the product of which does not yield an equilibrium, can be a correct conclusion. The product of every mathematical conclusion must balance as an equilibrium in order for it to be a correct conclusion. If correct conclusions regarding effects of motion are mathematically demonstrable, they are also mechanically demonstrable. Also, they are chemically and electrically demonstrable. Also, they are measurable as dimensions in their potential relations of plus x or minus x. The universal seesaw is ever tilting above and below its balancing point in inertia. Both movements are simultaneous and exactly balanced. The wave is a universal seesaw within which all dimensions are measured. Many times in these pages it has been stated that a change in any one dimension causes a simultaneous change in all of the other dimensions. A sphere which is doubled in its radius is squared in its plane area in section and cubed in its volume. A mass which has expanded to the cube of its former volume, freely floating in space, could not have so expanded without changing its potential position to one appropriate to double its former distance from its gravitative center, but in its same plane. In such a position, the constant of opposing pressures is 1/8 that of the original position, for the same constant of pressure has been spread over 8 times the volume. In such a position, the constant of temperature has been expanded to cover 8 times the volume. All temperature dimensions of expanding mass increase in their expansion dimension, registering greater cold, and decrease in their contraction dimension, registering greater heat. It must not be forgotten that all effects of motion are expressed in their plus and minus opposites.